You're listening to ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio, with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. This episode of ProdCast is brought to you by Ingenious. Ingenious Connector Enterprise connects your telephone system to Microsoft Dynamics 365 and CRM for increased phone agent productivity. Features like screen pop, click to dial, and call logging enable efficient customer service and comprehensive view of caller interactions. We thank Ingenious for sponsoring ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio. Oh, I'm doing okay. I'm in Denver, Colorado right now for the Hitachi Solutions Customer Conference is actually where I am. So it's good seeing some old faces and people I haven't seen for a while, so it's good.
Well, that's fantastic. I'm in beautiful Minnesota where we had the biggest April snowstorm of my lifetime just a couple of weeks ago.
I was going to ask you how your New Year's resolution to get better with your shrubbery was coming, but I'm assuming if you had the biggest April snowstorm, it isn't coming very far.
Everything I had on my plan for the months of March and April has basically gone out the window.
Wow. So we were talking a little bit ago about minimalism. What's your take on minimalism?
So, I mean, at a most broad level, I'm actually quite a fan of minimalism. Now, I that's not to say I'm actually any good at it, but I've actually done a few personal initiatives around minimalism. So I think we could talk about that.
What does minimalism mean to you? Because I know there's a minimalism industry. If you could have a minimalism industry, that's kind of grown up around that with magazines and books. Mm-hmm. And I don't know from the things I've read if I have a clear picture of, other than the general idea of getting rid of things, possessions that you don't need or you don't bring you joy, all different kinds of things like that. Do you not hang any pictures on your wall? What's your take on minimalism?
So, minimalism to me is there's no such thing as a bar of what minimalism actually is for me. It is a mindset where you're trying to kind of question what are the things that are actually important to you and focusing your time, your effort, your energy into those things that really matter. And, on the topic of productivity, there's an overlap there of what are those things that are, really important that are vying for your time. That same concept translates into minimalism with things. And in fact, in my experience, the minimalism around things can help free up time to be more productive on the other activities that I care about.
Right. Okay. So give me some examples. What have you done or what have you tried to do to be more minimalistic?
So a couple of things here. So I think I'd like to start out with a bit of a story of a friend of mine who he and his now wife were living in a 2-bedroom apartment. And I was talking with them, and they took an entire month. It was a short month. It was a February. But they challenged themselves to find one thing every day that they could go put into a box, and knowing that at the end of that month, they were going to get rid of everything in the box. And they found it to be very easy at the beginning, and then toward the end of that month, they were definitely feeling hard-pressed to figure out what are these things that we can get rid of. And I heard that story and said, well, gosh, that's probably a lot easier than you think it is. I have a lot of stuff. So, let me go and I'll give that a try. And I picked a harder month. There were 30 days in the month.
Wow.
But sure enough, early on in the month, it was pretty easy for me. But as things got on further and further, it was harder and harder. And I had to ask myself the question of kind of why was that? And it was partially around trying to there were so many things I thought I might need, or I felt like I had a good reason for holding on to them. And as I kind of went through that exercise and really started asking questions around around that. What is the true value of this? When am I actually going to use it? Why am I storing it right now? Especially things I've picked up a lot of hobbies that I've kind of dumped over time, but held onto this stuff for. So,
having this is just sitting in the corner collecting dust.
A banjo, but no, I mean, so having that kind of month of purging stuff to try to push things out the door really made me think about that, and it also made me think about all the kind of wasted time in some of these hobbies that I started doing, and for whatever reason keep thinking I'll get back to it. It's kind of like that to-do list or the maybe someday category of the list of gosh, do I really want to do this thing maybe someday, and do I need to hold on to all the stuff for it, or can I clear that out and look on for the next better thing?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Although I have kind of mixed feelings about it, because I don't think that the root of the problem is necessarily always the stuff. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you go overboard, and with collections or knickknacks or buying stuff or old hobbies.
Hey, are you throwing shade toward our previous podcast guest, Sean Tabor?
No. He uses and finds joy in each and every one of his pops. So,
true.
Anyway, but I think the root of that is where's my priority and where's my value coming from? And so I know and have met people in the times in my life where I didn't have as many possessions. You can live in a shack with no furniture and be just as focused on stuff as if you have a room full of stuff. So I mean, I think it's more than just the stuff. And I think in modern world, to me, it's more. I feel more need to do a digital version of that with subscriptions and things I've subscribed to and thought it was a good idea, and that streaming service or the umpteen music services. And so again, I think it's good, but I think if you put your focus in there and go overboard, you get to a point of diminishing returns where you can get rid of everything you own and still be questioning your life purpose. So again, I'm fine with doing it if it's like getting rid of things you want to be more solely focused on your purpose. But if you're finding your purpose in being a minimalist, that's where I find it goes a little bit too far.
Yeah, and so from that perspective, I agree with you, and that's kind of the spirit in which I made my earlier comment around. It's not like there's a specific bar that you have to hit for you to be observing minimalism. I mean, it is about more of a mindset of how you think of those things that you have, and much in that same way with things is time, and it's not a minimalism of. When you think of working through your to-do list or working on a project, so many of the topics we bring up on this show are around kind of that minimalist approach to how much time you're devoting to any given task. And I think that same thing applies to that stuff as well.
Right. And I'll say where, in sometimes when I've gotten on let's get rid of everything kind of spirit, I have regretted getting rid of certain things, not necessarily hobbies I had or collectibles I had, but things I associate with my past or my family or family members who are no longer alive. Mm-hmm. There's certain things like pictures and videos and things like that I regret that I don't have now because that person's gone. I'd love to be able to watch that video. And I got a little overzealous. So there's a period of time kind of before digital photography became really a commonplace thing, say 1990 to 1995, where there's a kind of a black hole in my life where I wish I had more things, not things, but pictures, videos, other things that I've misplaced or got rid of, thinking I didn't need to have them. So just I don't like if I don't use this every 6 months. Throw it away, because then I would never have any jackets, because in South Carolina you don't need a coat like 8-9 months of the year. But also, I think I like the idea of setting it aside for a while or packing it away and then revisiting it and then saying, do I really need that? If it's, DVDs, Blu-ray discs, books, all that's replaceable. But especially if it's something that is, unique or tied to your history or your family, I've learned from experience that you get rid of too much of that, you might regret it.
Yeah, no, I think that is definitely worthwhile. For the month that I ended up kind of going through that challenge, and then to anybody who's read, I had a blog series, maybe a few years ago, where I went even a little more aggressive with how much I was trying to get rid of in that way. Those were the types of things that I ended up prioritizing keeping. Just making sure that I'm not throwing away kind of precious memories that can't be replaced. Though for some things, that I would, if it fell into like an in-between ground where it wasn't actually like, my dad's, baseball glove from when he was, a little kid or something like that. There's something cool about having that physical thing. But, like a ticket to a Minnesota Twins baseball game that I went to in 1993. Do I really? I mean, it was just like it was a home game. I went to a lot of Twins games back then, and I kept every single ticket that I had.
Did they win the game?
I can't even tell you off the top of my head for that one. But I mean, of the ones they were, let me say I went to a lot of Twins games. We bought season tickets the year after they won the '91 World Series, and then proceeded to see a lot of World Series-less seasons of Twins baseball. But for those things that fall into that in-between category where I don't want to forget, and I do like having that trigger to inspire the memory of something that I did a long time ago that was special, going with my mom, my dad, my friends, whatever that was. So taking a picture of those kinds of just kind of triggers was a good way for me to make some peace with that. And part of getting rid of some of these things isn't just about the having of less stuff, but it makes things like cleaning up and some of the routine maintenance type of things that I have to do around the house easier because there are just fewer things to have to shuffle around. Especially with I have a 2.5-year-old daughter at this point. I have another one on the way here, and you tend to accumulate a lot of new little kid stuff, whether you like it or not. They're growing, they need things and that sort of thing. But making room for that by getting rid of some of the old, not really needed, but easy to just hang on to kind of stuff. Shove into a box, shove into a corner, and then that corner gets just piled high, and it's this really intimidating, aggressive project that's sitting out there. So the more I can do that a little bit at a time, the easier it becomes to find places for all the rest of the stuff that's kind of coming in, whether I like it or not. Like the 3.5, maybe 4 foot tall play kitchen set that now lives in my living room.
Yeah, well, talking about kids, I mean, kids your age and a few years older, their papers and their drawings and paintings just pile up, and it's like, to them, this is like valuable artwork, and you can't let them see you throw it away. That's the stuff that I took pictures of, and then when they were sleeping, I threw it away. And I wasn't cold-hearted or anything, but that stuff just like balloons and fills up the whole house, and then you can't walk through the house because there's all these drawings and artwork.
Yeah. I'm always amazed. My dad still has a filing cabinet that he can go to with the mat drawer, where you go in there and he's got the program from my band concert when I was in 7th grade, and the picture I drew when I was 3 years old. Not that he kept everything, but it's some of those same just kind of moments and milestones types of things.
Well, I went to my mom's house the other weekend, and was going through her filing cabinet, and she had like my grandmother's World War II ration stamps, had my great grandfather's naturalization certificate. That's the kind of stuff that is cool, and people in the future will should appreciate, and gives you a tangible connection to the past versus the junk. If you look at birthday party or Christmas movies, videos from even 5-10 years ago, chances are what you received as gifts there is not that kind of stuff. It's junk that is now sitting in the corner somewhere collecting dust.
Have we talked about how long you're supposed to hold on to Christmas cards for?
No, is there a statute of limitations or rule about that?
Well, I know I've definitely had this conversation on some podcast with somebody, but I'm definitely we've gotten through to the new year. It is time to maybe grab a couple of these that have a particularly cool picture on them, or notable milestone there, and pitch the rest. Don't feel bad about it at all.
Don't you feel bad though if it's the family picture kind of card? Like you feel like you're throwing that family away or something?
No, I don't. I really don't, Joel.
Well, I know where my Christmas card wound up.
Exactly. Hey, but I had it beautifully displayed on our holiday card board through the holidays. Nice.
All right, so yeah, that's good. And I think this was actually one of the challenges in one of the things I do. I think I mentioned the Strenuous Life Challenge. The thing from this week was take a bag and fill it up with stuff you don't need. And either donate it or give it away or throw it away or whatever. So, second topic is reading. We've talked before about reading fiction, reading nonfiction. I thought one topic that I've been thinking about and I've kind of come up with my own system for is reading nonfiction books. Mm-hmm. And I think early in my adult life, I wasn't a very avid reader, and it wasn't I didn't know how to read. It was like I would approach each book the same and just go read every word. And what I've realized is I don't think you want to do that because it takes a long time, and a lot of nonfiction books you really don't need to do that either. Plus, if you read things like self-help book, business books, technology books, memoirs, those types of things, sometimes you really don't know if they're worth your time to read when you pick them up. They might look interesting, but then you might get into it and it's not very well written. So here's my system for how I approach nonfiction books. First thing is I skip the introduction in most books, because the introduction generally doesn't add a lot to the book. It gets really self-congratulatory and I'm the greatest, and you can just start with chapter 1. Maybe come back to the introduction.
Or it's the teaser of each of the chapters.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's get into it. We don't need an extra 15 pages in this book.
So, okay, I just read a book called, and I can't pronounce the guy's name, but it was Risk Savvy, which is a nonfiction book about being more risk literate. So when you look at like the drug ads, you can tell really what this or medical studies, you can really tell what they mean and not believe the hype. So when I approached that book, I read the first chapter, and then you want to see kind of how it turns out to see, because the first chapter says, why does this matter? So if you get to the end of the first chapter and you still don't care about the topic, it's probably not worth your time. Mm-hmm. Then what I do is I read the last chapter in a nonfiction book. And the reason I jump to the end is because I want to see, like, where does the author's arguments, where does he go with them? Does he have solid arguments? And again, is it worth my time? But how did he get it? If the ending of the book repeats the first chapter, some of these nonfiction books are just a good idea with a bunch of padding, and they get super repetitive. And so you can kind of tell then if it's worth your time to continue. And sometimes, like, I'll use the 4-hour work week as an example. It has some good ideas in it, but I don't think it's a great book. It's highly repetitive. You read the introduction, or you read the first chapter, you read the last chapter, you've got all the good ideas in that book. Mm-hmm. And then once I finish the last chapter and say, this is worth my time to continue, then I look at the table of contents and kind of build a strategy. There's always typically some chapters that are more important or more interesting to me than others, and I'll focus on those, and some of the other ones I might skim. And that way, you can get through it a lot faster and still get what you need to do. And, the chapters you want to skim or you don't think are interesting, keep an open mind. You might find they're a little bit more interesting than you found. And the example I use there is The Signal and the Noise by Nate Silver. There's a chapter about weather forecasting, which at first glance had no interest to me just because that's not a topic I'm really that interested in. But then I started skimming through it and thought, this is really interesting. And that actually became one of my favorite chapters from the book. and versus a more of a linear narrative like a story or maybe a biography. There's, you kind of want to go through it in order and more deeply read it. But I think the average nonfiction book, I like this approach because I can get the gist of it and I can make a decision, not waste my time if it's not. And you can also, if it's not worth the time, you can also, with the free chapter on Kindle, you can download the first chapter, read it, and just without having to buy it, and just see, is this really worth my time?
Mm-hmm. So here's a question for you, Joel. As you go through a nonfiction book, are you a page dog-earer to be able to find stuff again later? Are you taking notes? Are you underlining things? Or are you just kind of reading?
I will underline. I just read, what was it, Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. And in that book, I was underlining a lot because it's just a very, very good book and just a lot of deep stuff. If I'm reading a book, though, that's, I don't want to say a throwaway book, but something that's more of a popular nonfiction book, I'm usually not intending to come back and read it. It has to be read it again. It's got to be a really good book to come back and read it again, because there's a lot of other books out there, and it has to be really good for me to come back and read it again. I might read something like Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People every few years or something. Yeah,
for me, I'll dog-ear pages, and I like to, once I finish the book, kind of go back through and jot down. There's usually a few. It's either a quote that I want to be able to have to reference back to later, and I don't want to break my flow of reading the book. So I'll just kind of do that in batch later.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Do you do any ebooks, or do you mainly doing paper books?
I tell you what, for most of my reading, I end up doing paper books. I do have a Kindle Paperwhite, which is a great e-reader, and I've read a lot of stuff on it, but I end up sharing books with people. I'll read something, pass it off to somebody else, and they'll share books back with me, so I end up having a lot of physical books to read. Also for nonfiction books in particular, I find that I do a better job of actually getting through them if I have a physical copy of it versus the ebook. I don't quite know what it is. I don't have the same limitation with fiction books.
Yeah. No, I'm with you. I will look, if I have a book on my list that I want to read, I'll look at my library's website and see if the ebook is available, because then I can read it without having to buy it. In that case, I'll download it. The other case where I do like ebooks, and I've gone more paper books this year than in the past. I'm kind of getting more to paper books, but one thing I do like, I've read some books that are probably a little deeper than what I traditionally have lately, and especially if you reach a really dry spell. One little trick I like to do is on the Kindle app on my phone, on the iPhone, I think you can do the same thing with Android, is you can turn on the screen reading feature and the accessibility features. And what I do there is, if I get stuck and I can't go on, I will turn on the screen reader and have it read me the app and just kind of push through that section. Or if I'm on a long drive and I'm in the middle I'm in the middle of a good book and I want to keep doing it, I like to do that. The robo voice is a little bit weird to get used to, but once you do, it's a good way. I may go back and read it and actually read it if it's something that's really important to me, but that's the way I found, again, to not get bogged down and stuck in the book.
Last couple of things from me on this topic. I'd be curious to know, on the topic of nonfiction books, if you have anything you've read recently that you recommend for folks. I know kind of recent on my list for that, I did read the book Hit Refresh, which is Satya Nadala's book, published kind of about the Microsoft story and how things have changed within Microsoft under his and his team's watch. It is interesting outside of being at Microsoft.
Right.
Another book that I read that was actually a really fun nonfiction read was called Algorithms to Live By, The Computer Science of Human Decisions, where it was taking the decisions that we commonly have in our lives and applying principles from computer science to those. And it was a really, really interesting way to kind of think through those different challenges that we see in everyday life.
Right. Yeah, so I do. I have a few that I've read recently. I mentioned Risk Savvy: How to Make Good Decisions by Gerd Giggensender, or I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Gigerenzer, and it talks about how even doctors and people who you think would know don't really understand things like risk. So you're more the risk in taking one flight is equivalent to the risk of driving for 12 miles, and how people are irrationally afraid of things like getting eaten by sharks, but they're not afraid of dying in a car wreck on the way to the beach. Mm-hmm. Another good one I've read recently is The Gift of Failure by Jessica Leahy, and it's a parenting book, but it's written by a middle school teacher and talking about how her frustration at seeing modern parents shielding their children from all types of failure. And I've been going through, with my children, it can get very frustrating when, their grades aren't where you think they should be, or they don't appear to be trying. And, kind of a warning about shielding your kids from failure. Like they forget their lunch. You're not supposed to go take it to school. You're supposed to let them go hungry, because that way they'll learn to be autonomous adults. So that's a good one.
Yeah, no, I have to check that out.
So I've been. Those are some good ones. I've read several other ones. Another one that I just put a mention for Megan Smith, who is Mark Smith's wife, and Mark Smith of CRM Audio and MVP fame. She wrote one about their year-long round the world trip that is very interesting, about why they did that, how they did it, how they paid for it, and all the things they saw. I thought that was very good, and she did a great job at that. So that's called Lost Heart Found by Megan Smith.
Oh, very cool.
So just a few mention.
Alrighty. Well, sounds good to me.
All right. Well, hopefully your snow will melt soon, and stay productive, Matthew.
Thanks. You too.
This has been ProdCast, the personal productivity podcast from CRM Audio with Matthew C. Anderson and Joel Lindstrom. Follow Matthew on Twitter at MCAnderson or on his blog, connectingthedata.com. Follow Joel Lindstrom on Twitter at Joel Lindstrom. ProdCast and the rest of the CRM Audio Network are available on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, and anywhere else fine podcasts are available. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.